So let's move on to the panel discussion now. Thanks everyone that's been contributing with questions. We've got quite a few, and I can see that people have been voting up. So I'll start with the first one that comes from Budwini Mavagan and reads, do you have any advice on using dive skills? So I think this one is addressed to you, Alex, in a sensitive, gentle way with clients who may have had torture experiences.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so the dive skill obviously involves putting the face into a sink of cold water usually. There are definitely ways to adapt that I'd recommend. A more gentle way that I've often used in sessions is getting a washcloth, just running it under some cold tap water. I keep a stack of face washes in my practice, just running it under some cold tap water, and then getting the client, wring it out a little bit so it's still wet but not sort of soaking wet. And I might just have them in their seat, just pop that over their face and eyes. And then if they feel comfortable, we'll go into them bending over and holding their breath. But I might even start, if they want to keep their eyes open, I might even start just on the cheeks and applying the cold here, maybe doing a holding a breath sitting, and then gradually build up to that. So using a washcloth may be better for people if submersing into water is too triggering. Yeah, a wet tea towel around a cold pack can do that trick as well. So yeah, definitely go the washcloth. And look, if the dive skill is not something that a client wants to try, just move on to the other skills. The dive one is the quickest, but you've still got intense exercise, paced breathing, and paired muscle that will do the same thing. So you can even take it off the list if it's something that they don't want to go near.
Thank you, Alex. Next one is also addressed to you. It's from April Darling and reads, thanks, Alex, for your interesting presentation. Some people argue that intense exercise should not be used as a distress tolerance skill for clients who are struggling with anger in particular, as it can be seen as reinforcing the connection between anger and explosive externalizing behaviors. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so it's interesting with anger, isn't it? Because there's that old school thinking of like catharsis, like decades ago, and we used to think, oh, you got to get your anger out, and now we know that that's not a great perspective, actually, the idea that you have to vent anger. Instead, we want to teach clients that anger will actually pass on its own. We don't have to get it out. So look, I think if I'm working with someone with anger, I'd really want to challenge those ideas about, needing to get rid of anger, and instead introduce this idea of, riding out and riding through. And look, I think with intense exercise, it depends how it's being used. There's a few types of people I wouldn't use it with. I wouldn't use it with someone struggling with an eating disorder, for example. If there's not enough nutrition going in, I wouldn't have them, doing intense exercise. I'd skip that one and I'd recommend some other things. And so I think, if you get the sense that your client is using the exercise in a way that's actually making things worse, if they're coming back from that run and they are feeling really elevated, then it's not doing what it should do. And I would actually suggest moving on to other skills. I'd take that out of the toolbox and reinforce some other things. So with the people I've worked with, most of the time, once they get to the 20-minute mark of exercise, usually they're quite deactivated. But yeah, there may be some where it may not be helpful, and so take it out. And I think that's the thing with all of the skills. We teach them, we try them, but also being able to tweak and do what's working for the client. And yeah, that idea that we need to vent does reinforce it. So we want to tackle that belief.
Thank you, Alex. Demi, any comments on this? All right,
No,
we'll move on to the next question then, which comes from Shakemu Martin. And it reads, thank you very much for your interesting presentation, Alex. For refugees and asylum seekers who have experienced trauma, where getting justice and resolution of trauma is not possible, what are the possibilities or the limits to how much the window of tolerance can be extended through DBT and maintained, for example, through grounding techniques over a long period? And how can we support clients when distress keeps resurfacing because of current instability in their home countries?
Yeah, great question. And this comes down to the fact that we can't always eliminate distress, right? And for some people, they are going to continue to encounter repeated triggers of that. They may not be able to get justice for what's happening or what's happened to them. And there may be ongoing things that, creating a lot of pain and hurt. So the analogy I like to think about is, increasing capacity. So let's imagine that I have a sink full of water, right? And I put the plug in and I put in 10 drops of red food coloring, and that water turns really red. If I put 10 drops of food coloring into a lake, I don't notice it, right? The difference here is capacity. And so if I can take my client, if I can help them go from a sink to a lake, the input is still going to happen. The stress is still going to happen. But if we've increased that capacity, they're going to be less likely to be overwhelmed. It's still going to be painful. It's still going to hurt. Those are really appropriate emotions, by the way. And I think that, seeking justice feels really appropriate too. But we can't control a lot of these factors outside of us. So, having a good capacity, what that'll look like for clients is that when these things happen, which they will, future pain will happen. Can my client deal with that in a way where they don't go into their avoidance behaviors again, or they don't get stuck in them at least? And, they don't start to kind of, go into non-functioning and problematic behaviors, but they can feel the difficulty with that. They can validate how painful, sad, unfair, unjust that is. And I think that we should validate those things. But also that they can choose how they want to respond and what they want to do with that, where they want to put their energy in their day-to-day lives as well. So yeah, I think about, how beneficial it is, particularly for clients where there is ongoing pain. They need even bigger capacity than anybody else.
Thank you, Alex. And then, of course, this is a lot of what we work on, with feedback and other techniques, because so many of our clients, some of the stress factors, unfortunately, are often on the increase rather than the decrease. Any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, I was thinking of that, with neurofeedback, or even when we address the biological aspect of therapy, we use biology in therapy, where helping that nervous system regulate itself. So as you were talking about, Alex, things are coming in, they're not coming into already a dysregulated nervous system. There's a bit of regulation there, so it's less overwhelming. And it's like, I really like your analogy, what you've used around widening that, that capacity to hold. And yeah, so neurofeedback, I mean, is one way that we help regulate that nervous system. And by a regulated nervous system, then that central nervous system is using different parts of the brain to process stresses as they're coming in. So yeah, I guess that's all I have to add to it.
Thank you. Let's go to the next question that comes from Boka Likanen. And reads, thank you for this very interesting presentation. Could you clarify the concepts of emotional regulation versus emotional processing?
Yeah. So I think about this actually on a continuum. So down one end, emotion regulation, and then down the other end, emotion acceptance, right? And there's a line in between. Now, either one of these extremes can be problematic. If I'm only regulating all the time, then that can basically be an avoidance. And again, like, am I actually able to process, feel, and allow emotions, right? So that extreme's not great. But I also don't want to be in total overwhelm where emotions are just washing over me, because sometimes other stuff just has to get done, right? I got to go to work, or I got to take care of kids or whatever, and I need to regulate sometimes. And so it's in this middle ground here that we want, to teach clients to move around. And some of the skill is teaching them when to more heavily regulate and when to go more into processing. Now, when a client comes into treatment with me, I'll always start by teaching regulation skills first, so that if and when we do more processing of memories, they have the capacity to do that without being overwhelmed. I don't want them to leave and have to do a bunch of avoidance behaviors because what's been brought up in the session. So I'll always start more towards teaching regulation. And as they get more skillful and as their capacity builds, we'll experiment with moving down here a little bit more and doing some more processing, always at their pace and always, with their permission. And, then using those skills so that we can do processing in a really safe and constructive way. But I never want them to get stuck too much in either one. I want to see that really nice, skillful flexibility depending on the situation and the day and what's happening with them.
Thank you, Alex. Demi, any thoughts on this?
I'm just sort of trying to think of it in a within neurofeedback and what my work with my client, and it's the thought is still forming. So let's go to the next one.
Okay. Let's go to the next question that comes from Apurva Madan and reads, how do you tend to determine signs that client may not be ready for trauma-focused therapy? What signs do you look for that clients' stress tolerance may be lower than their capacity to commence this work, and that's continuing to work on affect regulation?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to look at avoidance behaviors. How predominant are they and how serious are they? So if I have a client who comes in with a lot of avoidance behaviors, particularly self-harm, suicidal behaviors, which are potentially very dangerous, I'm going to want to address that first before I go anywhere near the trauma. And and I'd want to see a settling of that. I'd want to see the client being able to navigate day-to-day stressors with some confidence before we start going more into trauma processing. And the other thing I'm looking for, and this has happened to me sometimes, where maybe a client has sort of launched into a trauma story in session, and I don't want to shut that down, but I'm also mindful of okay, how's this going to go? I'm going to monitor very carefully what happens after that session. If the client leaves my session and has done some processing and talking about trauma memories, if they're engaging then in more avoidance behaviors following that session, that's going to tell me that we've sort of, exceeded that window of tolerance a little bit too much. And in the next session, I'm going to bring it down back to building skills. And building up that capacity a little bit more. So that's the other thing. Sometimes it can catch you by surprise, where you think actually a client has dealt with, some trauma talk in session really well. They seem really well regulated. Sometimes they're dissociated and we don't know it. But then they leave the session and they're doing self-harm, or they're drinking a lot, or something's happening. That tells me that we've gone a little bit too far there, and we're going to bring it back. Let's build more skills and then go from there.
Can I just add to that in working with children and adolescents, what I'm looking for is the attachment and that connection outside of the session. So and especially with neurofeedback, because we're getting this nervous system to a regulated state, and then there will be attachment seeking that follows that, especially if there's been attachment rupture beforehand. So I want to make sure that once they leave the session, they're going to have healthy attachment connection, and they're not going to relieve a sense of rejection and abandonment that may have pre-existed. So that's something that I look for, especially in working with children and adolescents. And with this particular client, was really hard, but was achieved. I had to look outside of that immediate connection because there was rupture there. So yeah, that attachment.
Thank you, Amy. Our next question comes from Ruman Ansari, and it reads, Alex, has there been any studies conducted about the role religious and spiritual beliefs? And provides an example, like in recent cases of Palestinians that believe in Hasbuna Alayhi Ni'mal Wakil, which I probably pronounced horribly, or which means Allah is best disposer of affairs, and how what role this could play in treating refugee trauma for Muslim clients. But I think it applies, to other religions. Would this fit under what you identified as radical acceptance?
Yeah, really interesting. I'm not sure about the research. It's specifically into, the role of religion or all those sorts of beliefs. But I would think that, it would certainly overlap into, when we talk about radical acceptance, the idea of handing something over, of reducing a fight and a struggle with something. And for some people where, their faith is a very, very important part of their life and well-being, that's what radical acceptance might look like. It might be handing it over to a higher power or even ancestors, spirit, land, Mother Nature, the universe, whatever. The idea that, we don't have to carry and fight every fight. So I again, I don't know about the research, but I would imagine that would be very helpful. And I think so exploring faith and, how people find strength and the concept of radical acceptance within their faith is really interesting. I definitely draw that out if I was working with a client like that, and be quite interested in how we could find skills and strength in that. Yeah.
Thank you. Any comments, Alex?
No. I think you've framed it so nicely, Alex. So
let's go to the next question. We only got a few minutes left, which comes from Hasiba Shamal, and reads, "Thank you, Alex, for the presentation. I really appreciate the structured yet simple way you explain DBT essentials. Since DBT is a very evidence-based and structured model, how would you approach situations where clients feel that some of the practical exercises don't align with their personal understanding or beliefs? For example, when certain skills, like the dive skill, might be triggering for clients with a history of torture." I think you addressed that partially in terms of how you actually use, the dive skills in a sensitive way, but. Yep.
Yes. And so, there are sometimes clients who, might be a bit resistant to learning skills. That might not be their expectation of the work they want to do, or there might be something about trying new skills that they feel reluctant to do. And so I think, we always have to work with, where the client wants to go. I think what I do there is focus on relationship, right? So get that, don't sacrifice the relationship for the skills. So I wouldn't ever push skills so hard that it's damaging that therapeutic relationship. But I'd probably take things a lot slower. I'd give more time, for space, for what they want to talk about. And again, that maybe more open dialogue. And then I'd just try to sneak some skills in there. Particularly if they're coming to session and they're saying, oh, this happened and this was really triggering for me. And I might just choose those pain points to just focus. And rather than teaching them the whole skill curriculum, I might just say, you know what? I know a couple of skills that might help with that if it were to happen again. Do you want to give them a try and just let me know? Like, let's just do an experiment, Or I'd say something like, humor me and give it a go. Just tell me. If it doesn't work, don't worry about it. But I'd probably just be then really selective about where are those pain points, where are those biggest triggers that they're struggling with, and just gently introduce and get lots of feedback. And if they come back and say, oh, that skill didn't work or that didn't happen, great, move on, right? Try something else later. But again, if you get resistance with the skills, come back to relationship and then just finding those ways, people are there for help, right? So, and if they had all the skills they needed, they probably wouldn't be in front of us. So they do need the skills, but how we introduce them is going to need to be, you know, with some finesse, you know, depending on where they're at. And it might just mean that we need to be really patient in how long it takes us to teach the skills.
Thank you, Alex. We have some questions that come in from Demiana, and the next one is from Diana Bojusevic, and reads, Demiana, would you be able to comment on the use of neurofeedback for clients who present with panic attacks as part of the trauma presentation?
Yes, it's a great question. Neurofeedback is, again, we'll talk about it with stabilizing the nervous system and regulating that central nervous system. So panic attack is, we can do neurofeedback. We have to be very careful which areas we are training. So when we look at neurofeedback, we look at instabilities in that nervous system, left and right. So we would have to, we can't train one region of the brain without training the other. So we can't reward frequencies in one and inhibit frequencies in one without the other. So that would be the thing with panic attacks. So neurofeedback is a great modality for panic attacks, but it's about stabilizing that nervous system where we're training it, and being very careful. So starting off very slow. You know, sometimes clients, especially with panic attacks, might be a bit fearful. So we've had times where we've had to model to client doing neurofeedback on ourselves before, you know, to show that no signals going into the brain. Also with panic attack, we have to be very careful about frequencies and what frequency we're rewarding and what we're inhibiting. So just going in there very gently and making sure that we don't do what right versus left and really cause that instability to happen even further. And using it alongside other therapies, so not in isolation.
Thank you, Demi. And talking about other therapies, the next question that relates, well, there's actually 2 or 3 questions on EMDR. And so maybe you can, one reads, you know, is EMDR applicable to work with torture and trauma survivors? But the other is, Demi, do you use EMDR integrated with neurofeedback? And from the case study, it sounded like the outcomes were consistent with what EMDR can offer clients.
I don't use EMDR. I haven't been trained in it. We have therapists at within our neurofeedback team that are trained in it and use it very successfully, and it's used successfully alongside of neurofeedback. Look, I can't comment on EMDR, and I don't want to talk about something that I'm not trained in, but I can definitely talk about neurofeedback's impact on the nervous system and how it regulates the nervous system, and then how it amplifies the use of other modalities that I've used alongside it. I've been in therapy with neurofeedback and without neurofeedback, and I find that neurofeedback really helps regulate that nervous system. So then that person sitting in front of me in a session is in a different space when I'm implementing my therapeutic modalities.
Thank you, Demi. Yes,
do you mind, Jorge, if I just chime in there? Just on EMDR, because I get asked this question a lot about EMDR with trauma, and I think it's important to understand there are different ways of doing EMDR. And, you know, certainly people who are well trained will talk about EMDR over a long period of time, where they'll do safety and stabilization, affect regulation, emotion regulation training first before going into EMDR. And I think that's certainly where the research is, that it can be helpful. We see a lot of people in my practice who have gone into EMDR and session 1 or 2 straight in to, and it can sometimes, with complex and interpersonal trauma, it can sometimes make them worse. And so I just want to flag that as just something to be cautious of. You know, with a simple trauma, like one thing's happened, that might be safe. And I know there's some good research around that. But with complex trauma and interpersonal trauma, there's so many different links there. And so I think we need to be extra cautious and, you know, as Demi said as well, you know, extra cautious with how we approach that. And it can be something used in conjunction with other things, but always good safety and stabilization first.
Thank you, Alex. I certainly use EMDR, and you know, we got several practitioners at STARTS that, you know, been training EMDR, and we do integrate it into our treatment approaches. But of course, like any technique, we need to use it with caution and, you know, make sure that, you know, we use it in a way that's applicable to the particular presentation. So thank you. And thank you both for a fantastic couple of presentations that really complemented each other, you know, so well. And for your answers, I think there's been an explosion of questions, you know, right away in the last 10 minutes. So we probably got about, you know, 10 or 15 more questions that come up that we won't be able to answer today, which, you know, I think, you know, credit to, you know, how interesting, you know, the presentation and the panel discussion has been. So thanks everyone that contributed to this. And I will end by letting you know that next, this is the last masterclass, clinical masterclass for this year, but we do have 5 really interesting masterclasses coming up next year. The first one will be on the 11th of March next year, and it will be on sensorimotor art therapy approaches in treatment of refugee trauma survivors. The guest speaker will be Cornelia Ilbrich, who's a very, very experienced therapist that uses clay field therapy. And the presenter from STARS will be Johanna Nashmi, who's also done a lot of work with clay and is also trained with Cornelia. We got 4 other clinical masterclasses coming up in 2026. They're all really interesting. I'm not going to give you the details of the others right now, but please feel free to look up our website and subscribe to our newsletter so you get updates about them. So thank you all very, very much. And Alex and Demi, thank you. You've been wonderful, and it's such a great way to end our clinical masterclasses this year.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.